Cawas Desai is a student of Zoroastrian religion, particularly its history and evolution. He was the founding president of the Zoroastrian Association of Pennsylvania and New Jersey and continues to participate in their monthly adult religion classes. Cawas was one of the first office bearers of the North American Morbid Council and has presented papers at North American Morbid Council seminars and at several North American Zoroastrian congresses. His topic today is the summary of early development of Zoroastrianism and its influence on other religions. I would encourage you to post your questions and comments on chat, and Cawas will be glad to answer them at the end of his presentation. Cawas said, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Tantan. Let me start. In order to fully appreciate the early development of Zoroastrianism, it is essential to understand the time, the place, and the social and political climate prevailing at the time of the religion's establishment. The opening paragraph of the Vandidad says, "The first of the good lands and countries which I, Mazda, created was Airyana Vaija by the Vanguhi Daitya." The Avesta describes Airyana Vaija as the seed land of the Aryans. It was at the center of the earth, and at its very center stood the mountain Harabereza, which some identify with Mount Elburuz. This description closely corresponds with the Rigvedic description of the land of the gods, with Mount Meru, which the Hindus identify with Mount Kailash at its center, and where the year seemed as a day. Both the Avesta and the Rigveda say that a day of the gods equals a year of us mortals. In this land, which was far to the north, there were no seasons and the sun shone 24 hours a day. The sun was supposed to rise and set only once a year, and there were 7 months of summer and 5 months of winter. The ancient Greeks called this land Hyperborea. Just as Plato had cited the Egyptian legend of the sunken island of Atlantis, the Greek historian Herodotus mentioned the legend of the continent of Hyperborea in the far north, realm of eternal spring. Its people were a blessed, long-lived race, untouched by war, hard toil, and the ravages of old age and disease. Much later in the 19th century, Herman Wirth, a Dutch historian, William Warren, the first president of Boston University, John Godolphin Bennett, the British mathematician and scientist, and Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, the Indian mathematician and astronomer, all posited that this land was within the Arctic Circle. With the Earth's axial tilt, which brought about the present interglacial period some 12,000 years ago, or about 10,000 BC, this land is now covered by the North Polar ice cap. The inhabitants of this land, the ancestors of the Indo-Iranian peoples, were known as the Aryas, meaning the noble ones, and that the Aryans believed in one creator god. The Zoroastrians call this religion Mazdaism, the Hindus call it Vedism. With the coming of the present interglacial period, the Aryas began a migration to the south through what is now the Russian steppes. During this migration, the ancient religion began to be corrupted by elements of nature worship. Stricken with natural calamities, the oncoming snow and blizzards from the north, violent earthquakes and storms, compounded by disease and pestilence, the migrants soon found themselves face to face with malevolent agencies which, in their superstitious wisdom, required propitiation. The deification of the natural powers, both good and evil, followed, and the religion of the Aryas degenerated into polytheism, idol worship, and animal sacrifice. The law of the strongest and the most powerful soon became prevalent, leading to greater and greater hardship and misery for the common population. These times of turmoil, of continuous warfare, and the evils of power-hungry kings and warlords have been described in both Indian and Iranian literature. The Shahnameh speaks about the times of Zohak, Ajidahaka in the Avesta. And the complete breakdown of social structure during his terror-filled reign. In the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, these times are described as those when truth and righteousness began to decrease and be replaced by falsehood and wrongdoing. According to our scriptures, during these turbulent and unsettled times, the soul of creation cried out to God, Unto you the soul of Mother Earth complained. Me all around do passion and rapine and violence enmesh. Reveal therefore to me a way out through a Saviour. And God replied, One such here is known to me, the only one who hath listened to our commands, Zarathustra Spitma. We believe that Zarathustra was born to return the religion to its uncorrupted state, to the Pauryotakesha, the religion of the ancients, and to fight the excesses of the Devyashnis. According to the late Jatindra Mohan Chatterjee, Zarathustra is one and the same as Parsurama of the Vedas, who the Rig Veda tells us is the sixth incarnation of Vishnu and who was born to subdue the power of the warrior clans and curb their evil practices. The date when Zarathustra lived is one of great speculation. The ancient Greek historians Xanthus of Lydia, Eudoxus of Cnidus, Hermippus of Smyrna, Hermodorus of Ephesus, Plato, Pliny the Elder, and Plutarch place Zarathustra in eras varying from 7250 BC, 6000 years before the Trojan War, to 6180 BC. The Vedic Sanskrit scholars place Zarathustra before 3000 BC, with some as far back as 7500 BC. Some 19th century scholars contending that this would place him in the Stone Age assigned dates of between 1000 BC and the so-called Parsi traditional date of 588 BC. A date of 588 BC would make Zarathustra a contemporary of Cyrus the Great and also contemporaneous with the establishment of Buddhism. As Chatterjee puts it, to seek to make Dharmaraj Zarathustra more or less a contemporary of Gautam Buddha is the height of frivolity. Most scholars now believe that Zarathustra could not have lived any later than 1800 BC. If the date of Zarathustra is open to debate, so too is his birthplace and the place of his first ministry. There is a tradition that Zarathustra was born in Raga, medieval Rai, near Tehran. The Avesta contains several place names, but there is no mention of any place west of Rai. Most scholars therefore agree that the Zoroastrian religion not only began but also developed in eastern Iran, and that Zarathustra lived and taught in the eastern reaches of the Iranian Empire, specifically in the Herat area, with connections south to Sistan, east to Balkh, and north to Merv. Zarathustra's teachings of monotheism, aniconic worship, and non-anthropomorphic God led to the schism among the Indo-Iranian peoples, which ultimately devolved into Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. The choice between Asha, righteous order, and Druj, false order, and the importance of agriculture in a righteous life furthered the split. In her thesis, Mary Settegast claims that it was this choice which secured the Neolithic Revolution. The importance given to agriculture is shown in the Vendidan, where God answers Zarathustra, "He who sows corn sows righteousness. He makes the religion of Mazda walk. He suckles the religion of Mazda." Sometime after the advent of the Prophet, the southward migration split into two groups. The Ahura worshippers moving westwards, the main branch of which eventually settled on the Iranian plateau, with smaller groups going further west and settling in the Baltics and Scandinavia, and the Deva worshippers traveling southwards and eastwards and settling in the Indian subcontinent. It should be noted that the religion of the Aryas and their language form the basis of commonality between Hinduism and Zoroastrianism, and the similarity between the language of the Rig Veda and the Gathas. Chatterjee, in comparing Gathic Avesta to Vedic Sanskrit, very succinctly points out that Ahura Mazda of the Avesta is the same as Asura Mahan in the Rig Veda, and Spentamanyu is the same as Shiftam Mangeush. The opening words of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, are, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, Let there be light, and there was light." We know these words as the Ahunavar, the Hindus as Om, and the Mahayana Buddhists as Namo Abhidabhya. However, before God's spoken word translated itself into action, there was thought. These three concepts, thought, word, and deed, form the basis of the religion taught by Zarathustra. Zarathustra posits a single creator God, who in his wisdom created the universe, which is governed by a set of universal and immutable laws. Zarathustra named his God Ahura Mazda, the Lord of life and creator of matter, and declared that he alone is worthy of our adoration. Reveal unto me, says Zarathustra, that name of thine that is the greatest, best, fairest, most effective. And Ahura replied, my first name is Ammi, I am. This concept is also found in the Rig Veda, where Brahman connotes the ultimate reality. In the beginning, there was neither naught nor aught. Then there was neither sky nor atmosphere above. Then there was neither day nor night, nor light nor darkness, only the existent one, self-contained. Having arrived at the basic idea of the unity of God, Zarathustra found himself confronted by the problem of the eternal conflict between good and evil since the dawn of creation. The prophet speaks of two primeval forces opposed to and at war with each other, Spentamainu, the giver of life, and Angramainu, the harbinger of non-life. These two forces, later described in the younger Avasta as powers or spirits, do not exist independently but each in relation to the other. They meet in the higher unity of Ahura Mazda. These two forces existed at the very beginning of the universe and are eternally in conflict with each other. Today, science describes these forces as positive and negative energy at the subatomic level, both equal and opposite, without which there can be no existence. In later Zoroastrianism, this concept of two opposing powers or spirits, named Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, one good and the other evil, gave rise to the premise that Zoroastrianism is not a monotheistic religion but is based on dualism. The same concept later gave rise to Mazdakism and Zoroanism, the so-called Zoroastrian heresies which held sway during the Seleucid and Sasanian eras in Iran's history. In Zoroastrianism, man must make the choice between good and evil and live with the consequences of his choice, both in this world and the next. The basic creed is summarized in the names and meanings of the 6 attributes of God, the Amesha Spentas or the beneficent immortals. God, Ahura Mazda, having given man the good mind, Vahumano, to travel the path of righteousness, Ashavahishta, toward attaining the divine kingdom, Kshatravairya, will enable man through devotion, which is Spenta Almighty, to reach perfection, Hurvatat, and attain immortality, Amritat. Let us look at the religion after Zarathustra. When the religion of Zarathustra was first revealed, Zarathustra himself had to fight against the entrenched forces of the old polytheistic practices. In his Gathas, he constantly seeks help from the Creator against the Kavis and the Karepans, and laments that his tribe and even his family have turned against him. Tradition tells us that eventually, with King Gushtasp accepting Zarathustra's teachings, hostilities continued between the followers of Zarathustra who opted for aniconic worship of a non-anthropomorphic god and those who opted to remain adherents of the polytheistic, iconic, and anthropomorphic deities and the sacrificial practices of the past. This difference in the forms of worship shows up in an interesting parallel to the legend of King Gushtasp's favorite horse, Aspisia, whose legs were suddenly paralyzed and who was subsequently cured through Zarathustra's prayers, and the legend that is found in the Mahabharata. According to the Dinkard, as quoted by A.V.W. Jackson, King Gushtasp had a chariot which could fly in the air. According to the Rig Veda, King Vasu of Chedi had a chariot in which he could fly at will. Narayan gave King Vasu a scripture inspired by the 7 Chitra Sikandins, the saints or enlightened ones, which was adopted by Vasu as the new Veda, which forbore the offering of flesh as an oblation during ritual sacrifice. When there was a conflict between the Deva worshippers and the saints as to whether meat could be offered as an oblation, King Vasu gave his decision in favor of the Deva worshippers, whereupon the saints cursed him and Vasu lost the power of flight. Vasu soon repented, adopted the custom of praying 5 times a day and giving up meat in ritual sacrifice, whereupon Narayan restored Vasu the power to fly. When Vasu next performed the great sacrifice, Brihaspati, the high priest of the Deva worshippers, flew into a rage, stood up with the ladle in his hands, and declared that he was not going to tolerate that an unseen god would take the libation. Although a large portion of Zarathustra's own words have been lost to us, and to history, Greek historians indicate that Zarathustra composed 2 million words of verse. His uncompromising monotheism has very clearly come down to us in his Gathas, where again and again he exhorts us that only Ahura Mazda is worthy of our adoration. Unfortunately, shortly after Zarathustra's time, elements of the old polytheistic beliefs began to creep back into Zoroastrianism. This can be seen from the content of the Yashts. Although the content of the Yashts is pre-Zoroastrian, the language of the Yashts, except for the Yashna Haptangaiti, is post-Gathik Avesta. Today, every scholar agrees that all the Yashts, except for the Yashna Haptangaiti, were composed and written centuries after the time of Zarathustra. There is considerable disagreement among scholars as to the authorship of the Haptangaiti. Mary Boyce contends that some parts of the Yashna appear to be composed by Zarathustra himself, while Robert Zehner unequivocally contends that the Yashna was composed by Zarathustra's disciples shortly after his death and not by the prophet himself. Be that as it may, the Avestic names of Indra, Varuna and Mithra appear in the Haptangaiti, and there is absolutely no question that these are pre-Zoroastrian divinities which continue to hold prominent position in the Vedas. Indra is the equivalent of the Verathagna or Behram-Yazava. Mithra, Beher-Yazat, and Varuna in the female form of Varunani is Banu Ava Arbisur-Yazat, more commonly known as Anaita. The names of these and other pre-Zoroastrian divinities subsequently evolved into the Yazatas, whose names are incorporated as the days of the month in the Zoroastrian calendar. The fact that these pre-Zoroastrian divinities now occupy and hold important positions in our liturgy points to the fact that these are later additions to the religion introduced after Zarathustra's lifetime. Clearly, these portions of the Avesta conflict with the strict and unambiguous monotheism preached by the prophet himself. Linguistically, Gathik Avesta appears to be a language of the communities of the inner Asian steppes. The transition of Gathik Avesta, the language spoken by Zarathustra, to the Avesta of the Yashts, and then to the younger Avesta, the forerunner of the old Persian language of the Achaemenids, would have taken several centuries. Even if the date of 1800 BC is accepted as the prophet's time of birth, 12 centuries passed before Zoroastrianism first entered Western recorded history. As the gospel of Zarathustra traveled westward from its original homeland, the Aryan Vage of the Kayanian dynasty, the language and practice of the religion must have undergone significant change. Through the legendary Huafritan and Kuduvran dynasties, of which all traces are lost, nothing is known about the then practice of Zoroastrianism. Our present knowledge starts when the Greek historians first came into contact with the followers of Zarathustra during the Median and Achaemenian dynasties. At that time, the Magi, one of the 6 Median tribes and a hereditary priestly clan, were the guardians of the religion and were the tribe entrusted with the performance of all religious rituals and the safeguarding of all religious practices. These were the advisors to the Achaemenian emperors and were the standard bearers in the forefront of the Iranian armies when they went into battle. How much did the Magi change the original teachings of Zarathustra is fiercely debated to this day. After the defeat of Darius III by Alexander the Accursed, the Magi appear to have faded from history until they are seen again at the birth of Christ. Throughout Zoroastrian history, the one principle that has remained constant and unchanged was that God is seen as eternal light, Anagra Raucha. According to the Bandhuhishan, at the beginning of time, Ahura Mazda created the universe out of his own substance, which is eternal light. Dr. Kenneth Vincent wrote, both the ancient Magi and the modern followers of Zoroaster see God as light, the oldest non-anthropomorphic conception of God. God is seen as the light above us, around us, and within us. For Zoroaster, the contrast between light and darkness is always a metaphor for the conflict between good and evil. In speaking of the God of the Magi, the 3rd century Greek philosopher Porphyry said, God's body is light and his spirit truth. In more modern times, Einstein saw all matter as frozen light, and Stephen Hawking stated, when you break subatomic particles down to their most elemental level, you are left with nothing but pure light. There is no wonder, therefore, that Zarathustra adopted fire, representing light, as the outward symbol of his religion. Athro Ahura Mazda Putra, the Son of God, the purest of the elements, incapable of being defiled. It symbolizes not only the energy of creation, but also the divine spark within all creation. Regarding the cult of fire, arguably the greatest discovery of all time was that of fire, and more importantly, the capability of containing and transporting it. This discovery gave man the mobility to emerge from scattered cave dwellings and become hunter-gatherers and pastoralists, which eventually led to the establishment of settled communities around a central fire. It is no wonder, therefore, that the fire has been revered as a divine gift from time immemorial, with great reverence according to fire in the religion of Zarathustra and in the Vedas. Let us briefly consider the central role of and reverence according to fire in other religions. Starting with Hinduism, fire is always present in every temple and at every ritual. Agni, the Sanskrit word for fire, represents the fire god of Hinduism, second only to Indra in Vedic mythology. He is equally the fire of the sun, of lightning, and of both the domestic and the sacrificial hearth. As the divine personification of the fire of sacrifice, he is the mouth of the gods, the carrier of the oblation, and the messenger between the human and the divine orders. In the Rig Veda, he is sometimes identified with Rudra, the forerunner of the god Shiva. Though Agni has no sect in modern Hinduism, his presence is invoked in many ceremonies, especially by Agnihotri Brahmins, the priests who perform the fire rites. In Judaism, the book of Exodus of the Old Testament tells us that God spoke to Moses through the medium of the burning bush. When the commandments were housed in the Ark of the Covenant, which in turn was housed in a tabernacle, fire was always kept burning in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And God said to Moses, "The fire on the altar shall always burn, and the priests shall feed it." In the Greek pantheistic religion, fire was always present in all the sanctuaries, and at the altar of Pan and Olympia, fire was never allowed to be extinguished. In Roman times, the tribe of the Flamines was appointed as the fire priests, and their sacred responsibility was to keep the fire on the Capitoline Hill always burning. Interestingly, reminiscent of Zoroastrianism and the dictates contained in the Vandidat, the Flamines were not allowed to touch anything unclean, and their cut hair and nails had to be buried. The Teutons always kept a lamp burning before the statue of Thor. It should be noted that in Germanic mythology, Thor is a hammer-wielding god associated with thunder, lightning, and rain. The name Thor is a derivative of the Zoroastrian Tyr, the Yasata venerated for the bringing of rain. In Christianity, every church has candles eternally burning on the altar. The fire symbolizes God's radiant glory as an aspect of His holiness and represents the sacramental presence of God. It is an accepted fact that the religion of Zarathustra has had a profound impact and influence on every other major religion. As Professor John Hinnells says, starting with the cult of fire and ending with individual accountability leading to the judgment of the soul and the afterlife, Zoroastrianism influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Its influence on Buddhism and through Buddhism on Confucianism also cannot be ignored. Prior to the Babylonian captivity, pre-exilic Judaism had no concept of heaven or hell. According to the religion of Moses, souls stayed in a dreary place called Sheol for eternity. Considering the first commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods beside me," there are even questions about just how monotheistic pre-exilic Judaism really was. These concepts drastically changed in post-exilic Judaism. The freeing of the Hebrews from the Babylonian captivity by the Edict of Cyrus in 538 BC is forever immortalized in the Old Testament book of Isaiah. "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and ungird the loins of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the mountains. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze, and cut asunder the bars of iron, and the hoards of secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name." This freedom of the Jews from the Babylonian captivity was the start of 5 centuries of close contact between Judaism and Zoroastrianism. As Boyce puts it, Isaiah celebrates Yahweh for the first time in Jewish literature as creator, as Ahura Mazda had been celebrated by Zarathustra. "I, Yahweh, who created all things, I made the earth and created man on it. Let the skies rain down justice. I, Yahweh, have created it." The parallels with Zoroastrian doctrines and scriptures are so striking that these verses have been taken to represent the first imprint of that influence which Zoroastrianism was to exert so powerfully on post-exilic Judaism. The Dead Sea Scrolls describe creation in a manner strikingly similar to that contained in the Buddha-Hishan. "He created man to have dominion over the world and made for him 2 spirits, that he might walk by them until the appointed time of his visitation. They are the spirits of truth and error. In the abode of light are the origins of truth, and from the source of darkness are the origins of error. In the hand of the Prince of Lights is dominion over all sons of righteousness. In the ways of light they walk. And in the hand of the angel of darkness is all dominion over the sons of error. And in the ways of darkness they walk. And by the angel of darkness is the straying of all the sons of righteousness, and all their sin and their iniquities in their guilt, and their transgressions of their works in his dominion. But God, in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, has ordained a period for the rule of error, and in the appointed time of punishment he will destroy it forever. And then shall come out forever the truth of the world. Of Zoroastrianism's influence on the Hellenistic age, Boyce says, every inch of territory conquered by the Macedonian Alexander had been held before him by the Achaemenians, so that wherever Hellenistic culture established itself in his wake, it was on soil where Persians had been living as members of the ruling peoples for generations, and where accordingly their religion had long been represented. She further states that the respect felt for Zarathustra by certain Greeks, notably those of the Platonic school, and the keen interest in the study of the heavens in Hellenistic times combined to make Zarathustra a much revered figure. There is a Persian tradition and belief that the contents of the royal library at Persepolis were in their entirety systematically removed to Greece and Egypt, and the torching of the library instigated by Thais, a courtesan and mistress of both Alexander and Ptolemy, was a cover-up for an already empty library. It is said that Alexander looted some 2,500 tons of gold and silver from the treasury of Persepolis. 3,000 camel loads of treasure were taken to cities more firmly under the control of the Greeks, mostly in Egypt. Credence to this tradition is given to the fact that the Hellenistic age of Greek culture began after Alexander's conquests and flourished after his death. Flush with the plundered wealth of the Persian Empire, Ptolemy II of Egypt established a library in Alexandria, which supposedly contained the wisdom of the ages and became a center of learning in the Hellenistic world. Western scholars are silent on the point of where all the manuscripts in the library originated, but Iranian tradition holds that they came from the plundered library of Persepolis. Let us consider the influence of Zoroastrianism on Christianity. In the words of John Hinnels, in the decades immediately prior to the birth of Jesus, Zoroastrianism was not a distant or shadowy presence, but the world's most powerful religion. The Christian belief in the devil, heaven, hell, the end of the world, the resurrection of the dead, and the final judgment are not just reminiscent of Zoroastrian beliefs, they have been taken directly from Zoroastrian scriptures. As Lawrence Mills puts it, the now undoubted and long since suspected fact that it pleased the divine power to reveal some of the most important articles of our Catholic creed first to the Zoroastrians and through their literature to the Jews and ourselves. In the Old Testament book of Jeremiah, the chief magi was called Rab Mag. It is believed that the Jewish prophet Daniel was Rab Mag and entrusted with a messianic vision to be announced as a star to the secret sect of the Magi. From the time of Jesus' birth, when the Magi visited the Christ child, there are direct links between Christianity and Zoroastrianism. It is now commonly agreed that the Magi were Zoroastrian, and one of the Magi, Caspar or Gaspar, has been identified with Gandophares, king of Gandhara, who later welcomed the Apostle Thomas to his court. The origin of Easter has Zoroastrian roots. Ava Avisuranaita was known as Inanna in Mesopotamia, which morphed into Ishtar in Babylon, and later became Eostre or Ostara, a Germanic pagan goddess, the forerunner of Easter. The Gospel according to John states that Jesus was crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, a Thursday, and was resurrected on the 17th day of Nisan, Easter Sunday. The holiest day of the Christian faith commemorates the resurrection of Christ on the dawn of the 4th day after the crucifixion, which is directly reminiscent of our own scriptural teachings. Mithra has long been identified with Mars, the Roman god of war. In the year 245 AD, the Emperor Diocletian proclaimed that henceforth Mithra would be the guardian of the Roman Empire. Until Constantine received baptism on his deathbed in 337 AD, Mithraism was by far the most prevalent religious belief in the world. The Mercian Order of St. George maintains that Constantine very seriously considered conversion to Mithraism and the adoption of Zoroastrianism as the state religion of the Byzantine Empire. Unfortunately, however, Constantine was not prepared to accept the Zoroastrian tenet that every individual is responsible for his own actions and will meet his corresponding reward in the hereafter. Constantine wanted full pardon and forgiveness for his sins, which he could get by accepting baptism and the last rites, and therefore he chose Christianity over Zoroastrianism. However, Zoroastrianism through Mithraism left its final impact on Christianity. December 21st, the day of the winter solstice, is celebrated as Mithra's birthday, the day of the rebirth of the sun, and is known as Yalda. This holiday was widely celebrated in the Eastern and Western Roman empires and was called Saturnalia. In the 5th century, the Council of Nicaea, in an act reminiscent of the religious and political accommodation of the Achaemenians, decreed this day to be celebrated as the birthday of Jesus. Due to various calendar reforms, the date moved forward by 4 days to December 25th. In later Christian tradition, Yalda became known as Yule, so Christmas Day is a Zoroastrian celebration. During the late Sasanian dynasty, beset by the heresies of Manichaeism, Mazdaquism, and Zoroastrianism, with the adherents of Zarathustra's religion being constantly challenged by a militant proselytizing Eastern Christian church, Zoroastrianism entered its waning years. Zoroastrianism finally entered its white twilight when the Sasanian Empire fell to the forces of Omar in the 7th century. That, however, was not the end of Zoroastrian influence. Mithraism continued to flourish in Italy, Germany, Central Europe, and England before militant Christian converts forced it into obscurity. Medieval Christianity, as practiced in the Balkans and from where it moved to France and Spain, is full of instances where the Catholic Church suppressed Zoroastrian beliefs which were present in the practice of Christianity. The Magyars of Hungary, the sakers of the Persepolis inscriptions, were believed to practice a form of Zoroastrianism. The Bogomils of Yugoslavia and the Cathars of central France believed, among other things, that God was not omnipotent and that there was an equal power of evil which God would eventually defeat and make the world good again. This was a dualistic philosophy espoused by Mazdaquism and contained in the Bundaishan, which was widely prevalent during the Sasanian era. These beliefs, which were considered heretical by the Catholic Church, were finally stamped out when between 1209 and 1229 AD, the Albigensian Crusades put an end to the very existence of the Cathars. Coming to Islam, there has always been a long Iranian tradition and belief that the Zoroastrian priest Dastur Dinyar, who was exiled by Khusro Anushirvan, adopted the name of Salman-e-Pars and came into close contact with Muhammad. As Al-Had Bait, meaning loyal to Muhammad's family and one of Muhammad's closest companions, Muhammad said of him, Allah commanded me to love 4 men, for he loves them too. They are Ali, Miqdad, Abu Dhar, and Salman. The Iranian tradition goes so far as to say that it was Salman-e-Pars who was the true author of the Quran. According to that tradition, one sees the hand of Dastur Dinyar in the opening lines of the Quran. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the universe, the most gracious, the most merciful, owner of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship, and you alone do we turn to for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not of those who earned your wrath, nor of those who have gone astray. The Iranian version goes a step further, saying that the original Quran then says, Mu Muhammad as Salman, Salman as Muhammad, meaning I Muhammad am Salman and Salman is Muhammad, words which were subsequently struck from the Quran. Be that as it may, it should be noted that the word Musalman translates as I Salman. The Sufi school of Islam is so close to Zoroastrianism that Jalaluddin Rumi, the foremost Sufi of his day, afraid that the name Zarathustra would not be palatable to the Mullahs, referred to him as Hashamuddin, the sword of religion, in his Masnavi. Rumi openly said that Islam should bow to the shining sun, a veiled reference to Zoroastrianism rather than to the crescent moon, a sentiment for which he was tortured and eventually executed. In literature, the Adai Viraf Name, which describes Adai Viraf's journey to heaven and hell, became the basis for the night journey of Muhammad, which Muhammad undertook on the magical horse Al-Burak from the rock in what is today the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and for Dante's Divine Comedy. In Western music, Jean-Philippe Rameau's opera Zoroastre, Mozart's character Zoroastro in his opera The Magic Flute, and Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, with its opening theme in 2001, A Space Odyssey, were influenced by Zoroastrianism. So also the Force in Star Wars and the Lord of Light in Game of Thrones. John Hinnels, in his treatise on Zoroastrianism, says, to Hinduism and Buddhism it is said to have given the belief of a savior to come, but it is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam which owe the most to Zoroastrianism. Beliefs in a devil, heaven, hell, the end of the world, the resurrection of the dead, and the final judgment, all these are thought to have developed in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim thought as a result of Zoroastrian influence. Perhaps no other religion has influenced so many people in so many continents over so many centuries. Had Constantine not accepted Christianity on his deathbed, Zoroastrianism would not be the forgotten religion it is today. We have come a long way since James Dharmasthita wrote over a century ago that as the Parsis are the ruins of a people, so are their sacred books the ruins of a religion. Western scholars continue to shed light on the religion of Zarathustra and acknowledge the debt owed to Zoroastrianism by every other major religion. Unfortunately, our own community perversely continues to languish in ignorance of our own religion. I would say in conclusion, therefore, that it is up to us to ensure that our own co-religionists, especially the younger generation, get to know the glory and truly appreciate the grandeur of our religion. We must strive and endeavor to enlighten the Western societies in which we have made our homes about who and what we are, so that the religion of Zarathustra can become better known and take its rightful place as the earliest of the revealed religions of the world. Thank you.